A black woman in first class, a white man demanding her seat, a flight crew asking her to move. But what if she didn't? What happens when a calm, composed woman refuses to be quietly erased at 30,000 feet? Who decides whose comfort matters more? And what if just one phone call turns the entire flight upside down? This isn't just a story about a seat on an airplane. It's about dignity. It's about power. And it's about what happens when the world is forced to finally listen to the voice it's tried so hard to silence. Meet Naomi Ellison, a woman who said no with grace and sparked a reckoning that grounded more than just a flight. So, we ask you, would you have moved? Would you have spoken up? What if silence was no longer safe? This story will shake you. It will hold you. And it will make you think. If you believe stories like this matter, like, share, and subscribe to support more voices being heard. Now, buckle up. You're about to hear what really happened on Flight A709. The low hum of the aircraft cabin blended with the faint clicks of buckles and rustling of carry-ons as passengers filtered into their seats. Overhead, bins snapped shut with practiced efficiency, and a soft chime echoed through the aisle. Naomi Ellison adjusted the silk wrap around her shoulders and let out a quiet sigh. Her seat, 1A, first class, was cool to the touch, the leather still stiff from early morning conditioning. The window beside her framed a tarmac awash in golden morning light, the kind of light that made everything look more forgiving than it truly was. She glanced down at her phone. No new messages, just the reminder she'd set for herself. Zurich meeting. Confirm projection slides. With a flick of her thumb, she silenced it and slid the device into the inner pocket of her tote. It had been a long week. No, a long life, she corrected silently. But today wasn't about the past. This flight was a threshold, a passage between everything she had built and the new territory she was about to claim. Naomi wasn't just flying to Europe. She was headed to close a landmark partnership that would expand her clean energy company, Ellison Greenworks, across 3 continents. Years of labor, loneliness, grit, and grace had brought her to this point. She tucked a notebook into the seat pocket ahead, one with frayed corners and a navy cover darkened by the oil from her fingertips. Its pages carried lists, plans, mantras, some written in moments of doubt, others during triumphs she never had time to celebrate. Naomi exhaled slowly and leaned back. For a moment, all was still. The flight attendant walked past offering sparkling water. Naomi took the glass with a smile and a quiet, "Thank you," letting the cool bubbles fizz against her lips. She didn't mind flying, not really, but first class wasn't about luxury for her. It was about space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space not to be underestimated. Because in every other room she entered, whether boardroom or ballroom, someone always seemed to wonder how she got there. She never answered that question, not aloud. She let her work do that. Across the aisle, a couple boarded, laughing softly under their breath. The woman, a redhead with dramatic sunglasses, tossed a suede handbag onto her seat without so much as a glance at Naomi. Naomi noticed. She always noticed. There was something that came with growing up black in America. Especially as a woman, you learn to read the quiet, the glances, the shifts in posture, the pauses and smiles, but she didn't hold it against them. Not yet. A soft ding echoed, followed by the captain's voice overhead, reassuring passengers of an on-time departure. Naomi took another sip, her thoughts already returning to the pitch she'd rehearsed 100 times in her head. She reached into her carry-on, pulled out a folder, and began reviewing her notes. The hum of the engine comforted her. Routine, neutral. It didn't ask questions, the kind of silence she welcomed. And then came the shoes. Click, click, click. Heels sharp, purposeful tapping down the aisle like a judge entering a courtroom. Naomi looked up, instinctively. A woman, tall, mid-40s, platinum blonde hair swept in a tight chignon, stood at the edge of first class, designer trench coat draped over one arm, luggage that screamed money. Her eyes scanned the cabin, then locked on seat 1A, on Naomi. Something in her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Naomi set her folder down slowly. Her heartbeat didn't quicken, not yet. But deep inside her, something shifted. A memory, a warning. She had seen this moment before, not on a plane, but in conference rooms, in elevators, in cafes where the host reached for the water pitcher but not the menu. It always began with a smile, and a sentence that pretended to be a request. This was going to be one of those flights. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Naomi turned slowly. The woman's expression was polished, confident like someone used to getting her way without ever needing to raise her voice. Her lips curled into something that resembled a smile but carried none of its warmth. "I believe there's been a mistake," she continued, her gaze flicking between Naomi and the seat number above. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Her voice was calm. "Is there a problem?" The woman's smile didn't falter, but her tone hardened. "Yes. Actually, this is my seat." She gestured toward the seat Naomi occupied 1A as if directing a bellhop to an error with room service. Naomi didn't blink. "I booked this seat weeks ago," she said evenly. "First class, 1A. It's printed clearly on my boarding pass." The woman let out a soft, patronizing laugh, the kind people used when they thought they were being gracious but couldn't hide their condescension. "Oh, I'm sure it's just a clerical thing," she said, waving one manicured hand. "They mix these things up all the time. You see, I always sit here. I'm a Skylux Platinum Legacy member." She emphasized each word like it was supposed to mean something. Naomi's jaw stayed loose. She'd been in boardrooms with CEOs who tried to bully her out of contracts with more subtlety than this. "I understand," Naomi replied. "But this is still my seat today." A silence stretched between them. A long, uncomfortable pause. Passengers nearby began to notice not quite staring, but definitely listening. The woman's nostrils flared slightly. "Perhaps," she offered, "you'd be more comfortable in business class or somewhere toward the back where there's more flexibility." It wasn't about comfort, and it wasn't about flexibility. Naomi knew exactly what it was about, but she didn't rise to it. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't make a scene. That wasn't her language. She simply said, "I'm quite comfortable here. Thank you." Just then, the flight attendant reappeared. A young man, late 20s, with a bright smile that dimmed as he noticed the tension. His name tag read, "Mason." "Is everything all right here?" he asked. The woman turned to him quickly, relief flooding her face as if reinforcements had arrived. "Yes," she said. "We've had a seat mix-up. This is my seat. 1A, I'm sure you can sort it out." Mason glanced between the two women. Naomi kept her expression neutral, calm, measured. He hesitated. "May I see your boarding passes?" Naomi was already reaching into her tote. She handed over her pass without a word. The other woman, noticeably slower, retrieved hers from a Louis Vuitton clutch and handed it over with a flourish. Mason checked the names, the seat numbers. Naomi watched his face change in real time from hopeful to confused to quietly awkward. He cleared his throat. Miss Ellison is indeed assigned to 1A. Your seat, Ms. Langford, is 3C. Langford? So that was her name. Naomi didn't react, but she did file it away. Rebecca Langford. Rebecca's face twitched. She stepped forward slightly, dropping her voice, but still loud enough to be overheard. That must be a mistake, she said tightly. I never sit anywhere but 1A. You can check my travel history. This is where I'm always placed. Mason looked apologetic. I understand. Ma'am. But according to the manifest, Rebecca interrupted, voice sharper now. Do you know who I am? There it was. Naomi had heard the phrase before, in different tones, from different mouths, but always carrying the same message. I am above this. I am above you. Mason swallowed, visibly uncomfortable. Naomi could tell he wasn't sure what to do next, and then Rebecca turned her eyes back to Naomi. Cold, calculating. You don't belong here, her tone seemed to say, but Naomi just blinked. She thought about her father, how he'd told her once. They'll expect you to apologize just for existing in the wrong places. Don't. Ever. She thought about her mother, who cleaned houses and saved every dollar to get Naomi her first laptop. She thought about every door she opened that was meant to stay closed to people who looked like her. And she smiled. Just a little. Not smug, not confrontational, just steady, like stone. I suggest you take the seat you were assigned, Naomi said quietly. This conversation is over. Mason stepped between them gently. Ma'am, he said to Rebecca, we'd really appreciate your cooperation so we can proceed with Borden. Rebecca stood frozen, lips parted slightly. Then, with a sharp exhale, she turned and stormed off toward 3C, heels echoing in protest. Passengers pretended not to look, but Naomi knew they had been listening. She picked up her notebook again, flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote a single sentence. This isn't over, not in fear, but in certainty. Naomi stared out the window as the plane began to taxi, but her thoughts didn't follow the runway. They hovered, circling the scene that had just unfolded. She wasn't upset, not in the obvious way. She wasn't shaken, she wasn't angry, but somewhere deeper, quieter, she was tired. Not the kind of tired that could be fixed by sleep, but the kind that settled in your bones when you realized how many times you'd had to carry yourself with grace in moments others were allowed to crumble. How often you had to be the bigger person. How often you were asked to prove your worth. Not with brilliance or strategy, but simply with patience. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man gave Naomi a half nod. She wasn't sure if it meant I saw what happened or I'm glad you didn't cause trouble. She didn't care to guess. The seatbelt light flicked on with a ding, and the plane lifted into the sky. Naomi let her head fall back, eyes fluttering closed. She had closed bigger deals than this one. She had walked into rooms where no one looked like her and walked out with contracts that changed cities. She had mentored young black girls who never believed they'd make it past the interview. She had survived too much to let Seat 1A become her battlefield. And yet she couldn't shake the whisper crawling up her spine. Why does this still happen? Why are we still explaining, still defending, still negotiating for basic respect? A hand tapped her shoulder. Naomi opened her eyes. It was Mason, the flight attendant, again. He knelt slightly so his voice wouldn't carry. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about earlier. That shouldn't have happened." Naomi regarded him carefully. He looked young. His smile now seemed like armor that didn't always fit. "It's not your fault," she said gently. He hesitated, then added, She's a regular. We've had problems before. I just didn't want to make it worse." Naomi didn't answer right away. She looked at him. Really looked. His uniform was pristine, his hands slightly trembling. He wasn't the villain, but he wasn't neutral either. "You didn't want to make it worse," she echoed, for her. It wasn't a question. It wasn't cruel. It was simply true. Mason lowered his gaze, then stood, nodded, and walked away. Naomi didn't feel victorious, because silence was never a victory. It was only a pause. A soft voice came from behind her seat. "Excuse me." Naomi turned. A young black girl, maybe 11 or 12, peeked around the side of her parents' seat in business class. She had big, curious eyes and a fuzzy notebook in her lap. "I saw what that lady did," the girl whispered. "I think you're really cool." Naomi blinked. The words knocked something loose in her chest. Before she could respond, the girl's mother gently pulled her back, whispering something Naomi couldn't hear. But the look she gave Naomi as she did quiet pride, deep knowing was enough. Naomi smiled, just a little. She turned back to her window and let the light paint her face. But inside, something had shifted, not broken, just sharpened. She flipped to the next page in her notebook and began to write again. Not work, not strategy, just words. They watched, they judged, but they also learned. From how I stood, from how I didn't leave, from how I stayed soft when I could have gone hard. They thought I was fighting for a seat, but I was fighting for a world where that little girl never has to. The cabin lights dimmed. Soft jazz filtered through the speakers. Dinner service had just begun. And yet, the air around seat 1A felt anything but calm. Naomi was mid-sentence in her notebook when she noticed Mason approaching again. This time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman in her 40s, perfectly tailored navy uniform, sleek blonde bun pinned tight. Her name tag read A. Colburn, Senior Purser. Her smile was brittle, overly rehearsed. "Miss Ellison," she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear, though her tone feigned discretion. "I understand there's been a little confusion regarding your seat." Naomi didn't move. There was confusion. It's been resolved. "Well," the woman cleared her throat. "Ms. Langford has expressed some concern. She's asked if you might consider switching with her, given her platinum legacy status and extensive history flying with us in this seat." There it was again, that polite violence, disguised as protocol, painted in company colors. Naomi stared up at her. "Let me be clear, I'm not moving." There was a beat of silence. Passengers in nearby rows stilled their forks. Mason looked down, visibly uneasy. The purser's smile thinned. "We're simply asking," she said, "if you'd be willing to show some flexibility, perhaps even empathy." Naomi's chest rose. Her tone stayed even, but her eyes sharp, steady, held the weight of someone who'd been asked her whole life to move so others could feel more comfortable. "To be clear," she said softly, "you're asking the black woman to move, to accommodate the comfort of a white passenger. who feels entitled to a seat she didn't pay for. The purser blinked. Color crept into her cheeks. "I'm asking," she repeated. Now quieter. "If you can be gracious." Naomi slowly put her pen down, folded her hands, leaned forward slightly. "I have spent my entire life being gracious," she said, "even in rooms where I was unwelcome. I was gracious when my ideas were stolen in meetings, gracious when I was talked over, overlooked, and expected to prove myself twice as much." She paused, "and I was gracious when that woman tried to shame me out of my seat." The purser opened her mouth. Naomi raised a hand. "But let me be perfectly clear. I'm not moving, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because every time a woman like me gives up her space to make others feel better, we make it that much harder for the next one to keep hers." A quiet wave swept the nearby seats. A single from somewhere behind. A cough disguised what might have been applause. The purser stiffened. Mason was frozen. Naomi calmly picked up her glass of water and took a sip. The moment cracked. "I see," the purser said finally. "Well, thank you for your clarity. Miss Ellison." Naomi nodded. The woman turned and walked away with clipped efficiency. Mason followed, but just before he disappeared into the galley, he glanced back, and this time, his eyes said something different. Not guilt, not discomfort, something closer to respect. Naomi exhaled. Long, slow. Her hand trembled as she lifted her pen. She wrote, "When they ask you to shrink, stretch your spine instead. When they ask for your seat, remind them who earned it." The hum of the engine softened. Dinner trays clinked, but a storm still brewed not in the sky, but inside Naomi. Not rage, but memory. Decades of grace under fire, centuries of silence sewn into survival, and the quiet ache of wondering how many more times the flight moved into cruising altitude. Outside, the sky was soft velvet, an ocean of stars on a bed of midnight blue. Inside the cabin, the air was quiet, but heavy, not with noise, with tension. Naomi had resumed her quiet posture, notebook in hand, pen gliding across the page, but something in her grip had changed. Her fingers were tense, her handwriting slightly jagged, because beneath her composed shell, something kept scratching. A feeling, a truth, a question she hadn't yet dared to name. If I were anyone else, would they have even asked me to move? A soft knock came against her armrest. She turned, expecting Mason again, but it wasn't Mason. It was a younger flight attendant, no more than 25, freckles and frizz escaping her hair bun. Her name tag read Talia. She knelt quickly, eyes darting to make sure no one was watching. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, "I just wanted you to know. I saw the whole thing, and I'm sorry." Naomi blinked. Talia looked around, then added quickly, "I know we're not supposed to get involved, but you weren't wrong, and I don't think it's okay what they did." Naomi stared at her for a moment, not with skepticism but with surprise. Something about this girl reminded her of the interns she used to mentor. Wide-eyed, brave, still learning which rules to break. "Thank you," Naomi said simply. And then she asked, "Does this kind of thing happen often?" Talia hesitated, then nodded. "You'd be surprised how often people get asked to make room, but it's almost never the people who look like Ms. Langford." Naomi tilted her head slightly. Talia looked down, then slipped something discreetly onto Naomi's tray. A folded napkin. "I don't know if this helps," she whispered, "but I thought you should see it." She stood quickly and disappeared before Naomi could reply. Naomi unfolded the napkin. It wasn't just a napkin. Inside was a printed manifest and internal document from the flight tablet. Her name, Naomi Ellison. Seat 1A, passenger class executive tier, verified. Beside it, a handwritten note from Talia. They knew you belonged here. She just didn't want to accept it. Naomi stared at the paper for a long moment. The cold proof pressed against her palm like truth solidified. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was refusal. A refusal to see her. To recognize that a black woman didn't need to borrow luxury, but had earned it and possibly surpassed it. Naomi leaned back in her seat, the manifest still in her lap, and slowly, the ache gave way to clarity. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't being sensitive. This was the kind of injustice people like to call gray area, but only because they were uncomfortable labeling it what it was. Bias, plain, simple, wrapped in velvet language. Naomi looked out at the clouds again. But this time, her reflection in the window looked back with something new. Resolve. She pulled out her phone, turned on Airplane Mode's Notes app, and began typing. Not thoughts, not reflections, a statement, the kind of statement that began, "To whom it may concern," at Altura Airlines. She was still typing when Mason returned alone this time, his face unreadable. Naomi paused. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into his vest and pulled out a sleek, silver envelope. He placed it gently on her tray, then said quietly, "From Ms. Langford." Naomi didn't touch it. "What is it?" Mason shrugged. "She said you'd know." Naomi stared at the envelope. Still, silent. Then, without a word, she picked it up and slid it unopened under her notebook. Not everything needed to be open to be understood. Some things were already loud enough. Naomi kept the envelope untouched beside her notebook. A symbol, not of submission, but of boundaries, of decisions made, of dignity preserved. She didn't need to read another apology, not one wrapped in money or pity. What she needed, what she always needed, was truth. And someone who finally said, "You shouldn't have had to go through that at all." The cabin lights brightened slightly as the plane began its gentle drift into the middle of the flight. Some passengers slept. Others leaned back with wine and headphones, escaping into fictional skies. But Naomi remained in her upright posture, typing, sentence after sentence. She was writing not for revenge, but for memory, for record, for justice that might not come with fire, but with facts. She was midway through drafting her formal letter to Altura Airlines Corporate when Mason returned. He looked different, less scripted, more human. He didn't speak right away, just stood quietly, then leaned slightly closer. "I read the report," he said. Naomi looked up. "I shouldn't have said it was a mix-up." He added, "It wasn't. You were confirmed in 1A, and there's a note from before boarding." Naomi closed her laptop. "What kind of note?" He hesitated. Then, a request from Ms. Langford, asking if her usual seat could be made available. Naomi waited, and the file says, "Try to reaccommodate passenger in 1A if possible. Use discretion." There it was, spelled out in airline code, "Move the black woman without making it a scene." Naomi exhaled softly, and then she asked, calmly, "So who approved it?" Mason looked down, then handed her a printed crew memo. The initials at the bottom read V.R., Victoria Reynolds, the lead in-flight manager, Naomi folded the memo gently and tucked it beneath the manifest Talia had given her earlier. She now had a full picture. A high-ranking, repeat-flying white passenger made a request. The lead manager authorized the discreet removal of a booked passenger. The front-line staff obeyed under pressure. And the woman, meant to be quietly moved, didn't move. Naomi turned back to Mason. His voice was lower now, not performative, not robotic. "I didn't know how far it had gone," he said. "But I saw your face, and I realized I've seen that face before, on people who've had to sit down, smile, and take it." Naomi studied him for a moment, then said, "So what are you going to do with that realization?" Mason straightened, his jaw set. "I logged a report into the internal ethics system, marked it priority. I don't know what'll happen, but I wanted it on record. With my name attached, for the first time since takeoff." Naomi softened, just slightly. A breath eased from her shoulders, because even small courage when done publicly can open doors for bigger change. Later that night, as the plane continued its steady journey over the Midwest, Naomi scrolled through photos of her family, her sister's garden, her nephew's science project, her father's worn hands holding up a fishing rod and grinning. Ordinary things. But more real than the designer leather around her or the empty stares of people who saw only her skin. Her phone vibrated softly. A message appeared from Avery R. "Heard what happened. You okay?" Naomi smiled. Avery, her colleague, fellow litigator, and sometimes quiet warrior in boardrooms full of old money. She replied, still midair, still standing, not letting go of the wheel this time. Turbulence hit not from the skies, but from the aisle. It began with the clipped sound of heels marching down the carpeted floor. Passengers turned their heads, startled not by the motion of the plane, but by the tone that cut through the cabin. "I need to speak with you." It was Victoria Reynolds, the lead flight supervisor, her uniform pristine, but her composure already unraveling. Naomi looked up, calm and unreadable. Yes, Victoria didn't kneel, didn't lean down. She stood tall, as if the altitude had made her believe she was still in control. "We received notice that you've been contacting individuals outside the chain of command. That is a disruption to cabin protocol," she said, voice low, sharp. Naomi blinked, slow and deliberate. Her voice, even softer. "I've contacted no one on board." Victoria stiffened. "That note to Mr. Harrington from the flight deck." Naomi cut in. Tone steady was in response to his inquiry. "I don't believe truth counts as a disruption." Passengers were listening now, heads turning, phones slowly angled, not openly filming, not yet, but waiting, because people can smell when something's about to tip. And Victoria. She was tipping. "Miss Ellison, I need you to remain respectful," Victoria snapped. Naomi tilted her head. Respectful, after being asked to give up a paid seat to satisfy someone's entitlement, after watching crew members scramble to pacify privilege while gaslighting her experience. Respectful. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried. "You're uncomfortable because someone broke your silence, not your rules." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. A flush rose in her cheeks, not embarrassment, but something worse. Loss of control. From the side, Mason appeared, quiet, careful. "Everything all right here?" he asked, eyes flicking from Naomi to Victoria. Victoria straightened, smoothing her vest. "I'm managing it," she said coolly. Mason didn't flinch. With respect, I believe Ms. Ellison was simply exercising her right to clarify a misreported incident. The airline's own policy encourages passenger feedback. A pause. Victoria turned sharply. Noted. Mr. Young, you may return to your duties. But Mason didn't move. And suddenly, it was clear. This wasn't just Naomi standing her ground. It was others choosing to stop retreating too. Victoria's eyes narrowed. But before she could speak again, Naomi said, "I'd like to speak with the captain. Not about turbulence, about procedure, about the chain of decisions that led us here." Victoria scoffed. "That's not how this works." Naomi didn't flinch. "Then maybe it's time you learned how it should." A pause fell thick, awkward. Then a quiet voice behind them spoke. "I think she has every right." Heads turned. It was Mrs. Morales, an elderly Latina woman from seat 2C, wrinkled hands folded in her lap, eyes like polished stone. She's calm, she's polite, but you treat her like she's a threat. Victoria flushed again. A man from further back added, "I saw her get asked to move. You didn't ask the other lady anything." Then another. "She's handling herself better than most would." For the first time, Victoria looked around and saw no allies, only accountability. And that was the rarest air of all. She straightened stiffly, then muttered, "We'll address this post-flight." But Naomi had already returned to her notebook, because the real turbulence had nothing to do with clouds. Later, Mason slipped a folded note onto her tray. Handwritten. "You don't know me, but I saw it all. They always ask us to be quiet, but I hope you stay loud. J." Naomi smiled, and beneath her breath whispered, "I intend to." As the plane leveled out, a stillness returned. Not peace, just quiet, the kind that follows a thunderclap. Naomi sat still in her seat, her body calm, but her mind racing, not with fear, but clarity. It was time. She reached into her leather tote and pulled out a slim phone, one she rarely used outside of personal matters. This line wasn't for everyday texts or client check-ins. It was for when something crossed a line so far. There was no going back. She hesitated, thumb hovering over a single name in her contact list, E. Harrington, CEO, line private. She tapped. The call rang. Once, twice. Then a deep voice answered. "Naomi, I was expecting your call." His voice was warm, almost too calm. Elijah Harrington, CEO of Altura Airlines, also a former law professor, also her mentor, also the man who once told her never waste your outrage. Use it to move mountains. "Tell me everything," Elijah said. And so she did, quietly, factually, no venom, no exaggeration, just the chain of actions, the dismissiveness, the paper trail, the confrontation. She read out the note from Victoria, described how Mason confirmed it all, and how multiple passengers had witnessed the event unfold. Elijah listened. No interruptions. Then, when she finished, he asked one thing. "What outcome are you hoping for?" Naomi exhaled. Not a sigh, but the kind of breath you take before a leap. "Accountability," she said. "Not just for the individuals, but the culture that gave them permission." He paused, then replied, "I can't promise you quiet." Naomi smiled. "I'm not asking for that." "Good," he said, "because this is going to echo." She hung up, folded the phone back into her tote, then returned to her window seat. Outside, the sun was beginning to set across the curve of the earth, the sky stained in gold and violet, and for the first time since boarding, Naomi let herself lean back, just a little. A short while later, Mason passed by again. He didn't stop, didn't linger. He simply left a folded piece of paper on her tray. Inside a printed form, passenger statement of incident, internal use only. Naomi picked up her pen and wrote, not for sympathy, but for truth, because stories become evidence when the right person is willing to speak. Back in the galley, Victoria stood stiffly, her arms crossed, her jaw clenched, and her name now under internal review. In first class, tension still hung like mist, but passengers whispered. She didn't yell. She never once raised her voice. She was the most composed person on the flight. In the cockpit, a quiet ping landed on the co-pilot's screen. Internal security request received. Immediate review required upon landing. Subject, passenger seating discrepancy. Flight A709. High above the clouds. Justice wasn't loud. It was slow. It was deliberate. And now it was in motion. The seatbelt sign chimed on. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making our initial descent into Denver shortly. The captain's voice came through, smooth and professional, but the air inside the cabin felt thicker now, almost heavy. People had started whispering again, not just idle chatter, but conversation, controlled, hushed, about Naomi, about what happened, and about what it said. From row 3, a tall man in a charcoal suit leaned toward a woman beside him. That's the woman who was asked to give up her seat. You're kidding, the woman said. She's the calmest person I've seen all flight. She didn't even look angry. She looked like she'd already seen it coming. The woman beside Naomi Lena Waters, a tech consultant from Oakland, finally spoke. I hope you know, she said gently. What you did back there, Naomi looked over. Lena nodded. It mattered. Naomi offered a soft smile, not performative, just real. I didn't plan for it to, she said. I just couldn't let it slide. In the galley, Victoria Reynolds was on the phone quietly, tensely. Her voice was hushed, but her posture betrayed her nerves. She didn't know that her call was already a step behind the clock. The real call, the one that mattered, had already been made. By Naomi. And it had gone straight to the top. Meanwhile, Mason stood just outside the lavatory area, staring at the statement Naomi had written. Every word was precise, no drama, no exaggeration, just truth. It was more powerful than any complaint he'd seen filed in 5 years. He tucked it into his folder and exhaled. Then, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Morales, the elderly woman from earlier, walked up the aisle, slow but deliberate. She stopped near the front. "Excuse me," she said, her voice strong despite her years. "I'd like to file a witness report." Victoria's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I'm not sure that's necessary. I believe it is." Mrs. Morales interrupted. "I saw what happened, and I've got daughters and granddaughters who've lived through the same song and dance." She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping the cabin. But not anymore. Not quietly. Then, one by one, a ripple began. A young man in business casual raised his hand. "Me too. I saw the whole thing." Then another. "I didn't speak up earlier, but, yeah, same." Then Lena. "I was right here." She didn't provoke a single thing. And suddenly, the quiet allies weren't quiet anymore. Victoria stood stunned. She opened her mouth to speak, but a voice came over the intercom. The captain. "Crew, prepare for final descent. And Victoria, please report to the cockpit." That last part wasn't standard, and everyone knew it. Victoria, visibly rattled, walked briskly to the front. Naomi glanced down at her hands, calm, steady. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made a scene. She had simply refused to be erased, and now others had refused with her, outside the plane. Denver stretched wide beneath the setting sun, golden lines of streets, clusters of rooftops glowing in amber light. But inside, a reckoning was landing. As wheels touched the tarmac, passengers stayed unusually quiet. Not because they were tired, but because they knew this wasn't over. Something had cracked, and from that fracture, truth had started pouring in. The jet bridge connected with a soft thud, but no one rushed to stand. Usually, passengers scrambled for overhead bins, but now they waited, eyes flicking toward the front, ears tuned for something more than landing instructions. Naomi remained seated, her spine straight, her hands clasped in her lap. Mason approached. He crouched slightly, lowering his voice. "Ms. Ellison, just wanted you to know, internal security has been notified. They're meeting us at the gate." Naomi's gaze was steady. "Good. Let's make sure this doesn't vanish into paperwork." "It won't," he replied. "Not this time." Up front, Victoria Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, looking pale. For the first time since takeoff, her perfectly shellacked composure had cracked. She scanned the cabin, her lips twitching into something between a smirk and a grimace. Then she addressed Naomi. "Ms. Ellison, I just wanted to say, perhaps things were misunderstood earlier." Naomi tilted her head slightly, eyes sharp. "Misunderstood, I assure you," Victoria continued. "I was only following protocol and passenger comfort." Naomi interrupted quietly. "You weren't—" Excuse me, Naomi didn't raise her voice, but she didn't blink either. "You weren't following protocol. You made a judgment, and then you enforced it, publicly, with the assumption I wouldn't push back." Silence. You could hear the click of someone unbuckling a belt 2 rows back. "I don't want an apology for optics," Naomi added. "I want structural accountability. I want better training, better instincts, and people in leadership who know the difference between comfort and bias." Victoria stepped back, flustered, unable to respond, because deep down she knew Naomi wasn't wrong. Just then, 2 uniformed airline representatives boarded from the front gate. One of them, a black woman in her mid-40s, badge reading Rhonda Lewis, Director of Passenger Equity, walked directly to Naomi. "Ms. Ellison," she said warmly, "we received your call, and the CEO's directive." Naomi rose, calmly. "Then let's make it count." Behind them, passengers began rising not in chaos, but in order. And as Naomi stepped into the aisle, a few nodded silently. Not to celebrate her, but to acknowledge her. A quiet salute. A recognition. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the seat where the original VIP passenger, Mr. Dalton, the one who had expected Naomi to move, sat frozen. He looked away. Shame can be louder than guilt. At the gate, Rhonda guided Naomi into a small lounge reserved for VIPs. Inside, water, fruit, calm lighting, but more importantly, privacy. Rhonda handed Naomi a folder. "Here's a full transcript of the flight incident, passenger witness statements, Mason's internal report, and this." She slid over a signed letter from Elijah Harrington himself. "Effective immediately. The following crew members have been suspended pending a full review: Victoria Reynolds, Martin Chills, and, yes, even the original gate agent, whose casual gesture of dismissal began this ripple." Naomi closed the folder gently. No smile, no revenge glee, just breath, full, deep, human breath. "Thank you," she said. Rhonda leaned forward. "You shouldn't have had to be the one to make this happen." Naomi met her eyes. "And yet, I was." And just like that, it was done. Not everything, but this part, the acknowledgement, the action, the visible step forward. Later that night, in her quiet hotel suite, Naomi stood by the window. The Denver skyline blinked slowly beneath a navy sky. She pulled out her personal phone. One new message from Elijah. "You didn't just land a flight today. You helped this airline take off in a new direction." Naomi stared at the words, then closed the phone and whispered to no one but herself, "Let's keep climbing." The story hit Twitter at 6:17 a.m. By 8:45 it was trending nationwide. Seat for dignity, not moving, flight A709, and Naomi Ellison's name. It was everywhere, not because she chased it, but because she refused to shrink. It started with a passenger post, a photo snapped discreetly mid-flight, showing Naomi seated calmly while a flustered flight attendant loomed above her. Then came the caption. She never raised her voice, but somehow the whole plane got quiet. Within hours, news outlets picked it up. Bloggers speculated. Activists amplified. Even celebrities began chiming in. But Naomi. She sat in her Denver hotel room, phone buzzing, watching her name echo across platforms. She didn't smile, didn't panic. She just sat there, barefoot on the carpet, staring at a text from her younger sister, Camille Naomi. "Are you okay? I'm so proud of you. But I also know how loud the world can get." Naomi exhaled. Yes, it was loud. But strangely, it was the quiet that hurt more. Flashback to 12 hours ago. Sitting alone in row 1, how many times had she chosen silence? How many times had she made herself smaller for convenience, for safety, for the illusion of peace? And now, by refusing once, the entire world decided to see her. It felt surreal, unjust, even. That afternoon, a call came in from Elijah Harrington himself, CEO of Altura Airlines. "Ms. Ellison." His voice was low, deliberate, respectful. "I just wanted to thank you, not for what you exposed, but for how you did it. I didn't want this kind of attention." Naomi replied, "I wanted fairness, accountability." "You'll have it," Elijah said. Publicly. And publicly it came. By 5 p.m., Altura Airlines issued a statement. "We failed a valued passenger on flight A709. We have initiated structural training, accountability measures, and an internal review. Racism, covert or overt, has no altitude here." Naomi read the release once, then twice, still calm, still steady. But somewhere in her chest, something began to unclench. Later that evening, she walked to a small bookstore on Colfax Avenue. No cameras, no press, just her and a journal, the kind with thick paper and no lines. She opened it to a blank page and wrote one sentence: "I did not ask for this flight to matter." Then, below it, "But it did." Inside, her thoughts warred. Should she speak publicly? Join the interviews? Use this moment as a platform? Or let it pass? Let the world make its noise and simply go home? She thought of the little black girls who might be watching, of the older women who'd silently endured, of the men who now stared a little longer at their own behavior. She closed her eyes, not to escape, but to center herself. Then her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Rhonda Lewis Media asking for a statement. We won't push you, but if you'd like, the mic is yours. Naomi stared at the screen, felt her heart beat slow. Then, with a small inhale, she typed tomorrow, 10 a.m., one interview, I'll speak, and so she would. Not because the world demanded it, but because she had something to say, and the courage to say it quietly, clearly, unshakably. The press conference was held in a quiet atrium on the 7th floor of the Altura Airlines regional headquarters in Denver. No red carpet, no music, just a single wooden podium, a modest Altura backdrop, and a half-circle of chairs. Naomi stood behind the curtain, heart steady but hands lightly trembling. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't angry. She was simply aware of the weight of the moment, of the eyes, of the choice she had made not to be silent anymore. Rhonda Lewis adjusted the mic, then turned to Naomi. When you're ready. Naomi gave a single nod, then stepped into the light. There were no cheers, no cameras flashing, just silence, the kind that leans in. She began simply, my name is Naomi Ellison. I'm a creative director, a sister, a frequent traveler, and, until 5 days ago, a stranger to all of you. A pause. I boarded flight A709 to Denver, expecting a standard trip. What I experienced instead was something many people of color, particularly black women, have felt for years: a public request to yield, to shrink, to move. Not because we've done anything wrong, but because someone else's comfort takes precedence over our presence. She told the story plainly. No theatrics, no dramatics. She told them about the seat, about the request, about the silence of other crew members, about how it all unraveled not in a scream, but in a refusal. I didn't make a scene, but I also didn't comply, and that made me visible. Naomi scanned the small crowd of journalists, employees, and passengers who had come to hear her. Some nodded, some held pens mid-air, forgetting to write. Some blinked back tears. This isn't about one crew, or one airline, or one seat. This is about a culture that asks some of us to be grateful for almost being treated equally. It's about invisible hierarchies that we're told are just misunderstandings, but really they're old roots, deep ones. She stopped, just for a breath, then continued. I didn't ask for anyone to be fired. I asked for accountability, and I received it not because I demanded it, but because the truth left no room for denial. I don't hate those who misjudged me, but I will not excuse them either. We can love people, we can respect organizations, and we can still demand better from them. Behind her, Rhonda looked down, silent tears streaking her cheek, and across the room, Mason Young, now reinstated and quietly standing along the wall, pressed a hand to his chest. Naomi's final words rang low and sure to every person who's ever been asked to move, to yield, to explain their worth before they're allowed to exist comfortably in a space. I see you. You matter. You do not have to move to be valid. Sometimes, staying seated is the most powerful thing you can do. She stepped back. No applause, just stillness, a respect too deep for clapping. And then the lights above slowly brightened. The cabin was no longer dim, and neither was she. Naomi never raised her voice. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stayed seated, but her stillness, it roared. This story isn't just about one woman or one airline. It's about a system that too often tells black women to move, to adjust, to disappear for the comfort of others, but not this time. In refusing to be displaced, Naomi reminded us all that dignity isn't negotiable, that silence isn't always peace, and that the most powerful protest can sometimes be stillness. Let this be a call to all of us to listen more deeply, to stand more boldly, and to challenge the quiet ways injustice tries to fly under the radar, because discrimination doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers behind closed curtains, and it's up to us to pull them open. If Naomi's story moved you like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor courage, confront injustice, and celebrate humanity. Until next time, stay grounded in truth and never be afraid to take your seat.